Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Startup Junkies podcast. Before we begin, if you could leave us a rating on Apple or wherever you listen, that would be great. The team would be very appreciative of that. Now, getting into the episode, today we have Jeff Emerine and Caleb Talley. How are y'all doing today?
Great.
Hello.
Glad to be back.
Good. And today we have a very special guest with us. His name is Norman Crowley. He is the CEO and founder of the Cool Planet Group. Done some really cool things in the gaming area, and we are very lucky to have him here today. Norman, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Good to see you all. Yeah.
Good to see you. And to kick it off, it would be great to hear about what's led you to where you are today, just sort of the background there.
From the very beginning, or from?
Yeah, you could start with Genesis. You start with Genesis if you want, and you can skip over the who begat part of the Bible. But otherwise, we want to know the whole story.
Okay. Genesis, pretty good rock band.
Absolutely.
Peter Gabriel, Phil Collins. So I'm, as you can tell from my accent, I'm Irish, and so I was born in 1970, makes me 50 this year, and Ireland in the 1970s and the 1980s was kind of like a third world country, and so I grew up on a farm. There was never much money, and so I guess what used to happen with us when we were kids was we would watch TV shows like Dallas. So who on this call, who of the three of you remembers the original version of Dallas? That's what I thought. Yeah. The two kids are going, we have no idea what I was talking about. And I just wanted what they had, not the divorces and the rampant sleeping around, but the money and the success and all of that. And when you're in a third world country and you're looking at the kind of wealth these people have, you just aspire to that. And so when I was 13, my dad taught me how to weld, because we grew up on a farm, and the only way you can fix things on farms is to fix it yourself. And I became obsessed with welding, because it was kind of like alchemy. You could fix something, you could create something out of nothing. And so I set up a welding company when I was 15. And fast forward, when I was 20, I had about 15 people working in the welding company. And a local builder bought the business off me. And so it was an early exit, relatively small exit, but an early exit. And all the time I was doing that, I loved software, and I used to write software in my bedroom. And software at the time was pretty rudimentary. It wasn't like punch cards, but it was pretty rudimentary software. And so I set up a technology company, and that technology company over 8 years became quite big. After about 5 years, I discovered the internet in about 1997, when it was kind of clunky and slow, but you could see the potential of it. I guess it was like seeing, if you think about the Wright brothers, the first flight in Kitty Hawk, like some people looked at it and just went, by the way, can I curse on your podcast or not?
Sure.
Sure.
Go ahead. You're talking to an old sailor. I mean, it's if you don't curse, you're not trying hard.
Yeah. So some people would look at that first plane and just go, it's a heap of shit, and these guys are never going to achieve anything, right? And somebody else would just look at it and go, oh my God, like what we could do with this technology, right? And so when I saw the internet, it was like that. Yeah, it was a bit shit, but actually what you could do with it was amazing. And so we sold that business in 1999 when you two were about 4. And I retired. So at the ripe old age of 28, I retired. But I'd never really realized what I wanted to retire for or do. And so I went through a kind of slight existential crisis about what was life all about, because this money thing was lovely, but it wasn't really that entertaining. My wife says there's only so many handbags you can buy, right? And so then I set up another company, which was, as you referred to, in the gaming industry. And that occurred because I went into a betting shop. So you don't really have betting shops in the US, or you don't have legal betting shops anyway. But in the UK, you have betting shops. And they had these really old slot machines in there that were not connected to anything. And this was 2000. And I was like, why don't you connect these things to the internet? And they would be much more entertaining. And the guy in the shop said, if you think you're so clever, why don't you build one? So, and I had never gambled in my life, and I very rarely gamble. But we invented this technology called server-based gaming, which is where the games exist on the server and not on the machine. And cut a long story short, so that was 2000. By 2006, we had a business doing $300 million in server-based gaming. We had about 2,500 people. We were public on the London Stock Exchange. So, and it was wildly stressful, by the way, from 2000 until 2006. Mm-hmm. And then in 2006, or in 2007, we were public. A hedge fund offered to buy the business for $1 billion. We agreed to sell it. And all the time the sale process was going on, Lehman Brothers was happening, and the world was just falling apart. But the sale was still going ahead. And then with 2 hours to go, famously, to closing, the world just fell apart too much. And the sale never happened. And so then we started January 2008 with no sale and lots of business pressures because of global recession. And then over a period of 6 or 7 months, we bolted the business back together again. And we sold it in about August 2008 for about $500 million. Yeah. Not a bad result, considering we started with 8 people and 100 grand. And then what you realize being an entrepreneur is that it really is about the work. It's not about the money. And it's about the other people involved and that kind of thing. And so I realized that if I was going to do another startup, that I was signing up for another 10 years of my life. And so I wanted to do something with a bit more meaning. And so we set up a business around climate change, because a friend of mine who I'd set up another business with he had been passionate about climate change, and he had convinced us that it was real. And so we set up a business first doing energy efficiency, and now that business has morphed into what Cool Planet Group is today, which is, it's kind of global leader in fighting all things climate change. So we invent things that are very cool, that people want, that help solve climate change. And that could be anything from biggest business is energy efficiency. We operate in 23 countries. We have lots of clients near where you are there. And we save them money on their energy. And that could be by putting in solar, or it could be by just stopping them from wasting energy in their factories. And we work with 4 of the top 5 food companies in the world, 7 of the top 8 pharmaceutical companies in the world, some very big petrochemical companies. And we're the global leader in that space. And then, so that's that business. And then our other main business is sexy as hell. It's in the classic car business. So we convert classic cars into high performance electrics called hyperclassics. And that is very cool business. You only really realize how cool it is when you sit in a 1963 Corvette Stingray that we have taken from maybe 180 brake horsepower currently to 1,200 brake horsepower. And
fantastic.
Wow.
and some people listening to this podcast will be, I don't buy that electrical stuff. That's my American accent. And frankly, all of that goes out the window when you sit into one of our cars, because they are just sexy as hell. Yep. And we're sold out until March 2022 in
Wow.
that business, despite expanding like crazy. And then the other thing that we do is we set up a charitable foundation called Cool Planet Experience to challenge what people think about climate change, because people think that people are always challenged around climate change because we love the lives we lead, right? So we can get up in the morning in an air-conditioned house and hop into a F-150 and put our right foot down and drive that car, and we live these amazing lives. And then what happened around climate change is a whole bunch of people with the last 40 years said, well, you can't live your life like that anymore. You've got to, live in your house with the air conditioning switched off and drive this kind of weird eco car, right? And you have, by the way, you can't eat steak anymore. And that was true 40 years ago. So there wasn't anything wrong with that message 40 years ago, right? But in 2020, that message is just complete horseshit. Like you can now drive the sexiest car on the planet, which happens to be electric. You can have your steak. It's just preferable if it didn't come from a cow. And you can have all the energy you want because there's a big nuclear reactor up in the sky. And so our message is our message to kids in particular is never mind that hippie shit that people used to talk about. Like, this is the way the world is today. And that's a very different message, actually. And it turns out that's a message that people want to hear because people just want to live their lives. They don't want to be constrained, and they don't want to hear about what they can't do. They want to hear about what they can do. Yeah. I've been talking for quite a long time.
I'll tell you what.
You guys speak.
Well, and that was good. And we didn't want to interrupt you because it's rare that we have guests that have touched as many sectors as you've touched, and it's pretty compelling. But that last bit you said there may be the best thing I've ever heard said about how innovation can drive cleaner, better technology, and you don't have to give up anything.
Yeah.
Because I think part of what caused this massive divide, particularly in the US, was it was like, it's going to be all this great sacrifice and just find a cave and pull out your spear because you're going to have to go back and make all these sacrifices. That's the only way it will work. Whereas the entrepreneur looks at it and says, that's probably not how the story ends. We'll figure out how to science the shit out of the solution, as Matt Damon would say, and come up with something a whole lot better. So I got to tell you something. I think that the people who haven't built things and who have been on the sidelines and maybe read the reports can't appreciate what drives entrepreneurs to really challenge that status quo and do amazing things.
And there's another thing. I'm a kind of weird person because I'm a capitalist socialist, right? So, I pay my taxes so that people who are less fortunate can get looked after, right? But that said, I'm a capitalist, right? And the other thing, arguing with tree hugging people, right? And I like a good tree as much as the next person, right? is they conflate, if that's the right word, they conflate other stuff they'd like to have happen in the world with climate change. Now, that's where that's not where all the problem is, but that's where a lot of the problem is, right? Because, we really get angry at people when they do that, because there are people in Bangladesh dying because water levels are rising, right? And then that has nothing to do with the fact that you would like rich people to be less rich, right? And it's really dangerous tying both of those things together, because when you tie both of those things together, you alienate whole swathes of the population. And then poor people in Bangladesh drown because you've got some other agenda, right? And when I say that to people, then they go, yeah, but that's because you're a filthy capitalist pig, right? And I'm kind of going, I kind of am, but I'm kind of weird because I kind of like the other side too, right? And so it's kind of like the election that has just passed, right? It's not that simple. It is not these guys or these guys. And when you make it that simple, then you're making a huge mistake making it that simple. It is not them and it is not us. It is what are the gray bits in between, because that's how we fix this. Yeah.
Well, punishing productivity is never a good strategy in change. I mean, it's not. Because the productivity will find the place that it needs to be in order to achieve its aims. Entrepreneurs and innovators are driven. It's just, do you want them where you are, or do you want to push them somewhere else?
Completely. And what's happened in climate change as well is people come up with some dog shit product that nobody wants. and then they try and use guilt to sell it to you, right? And like Elon Musk is a huge hero of mine, right? Because like, all you have to do is sit in that car. You don't have to debate climate change anymore. It's just, you want to go fast or slow?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's like you tape all the design benefits that the experience you'd have with, an Apple iPhone, and it's manifest in a car. It's just the coolest thing ever. Yeah. I mean, there's people on our team that are totally bought in, that drive Teslas, and it's like no other experience. And I will say, as that really begins to unlock, particularly in the US, particularly in the center of the US, when the infrastructure is there for recharge and rapid recharge, you'll see even more people buying in. So,
and the other thing in our business, in classic cars, right? People go, you can't beat the sound, and you're kind of going, I'll give you that. The sound is very nice, right? But sit in one of our cars, right?
Yeah.
And it's all over. It's all like, when you take a Stingray from 200 brake to 1200 brake, it's all over. There's no discussion about whether that's a good idea or not. Of course, it's a good idea.
I think
I'm dominating all the questions. Go ahead, Caleb.
I was going to say, you have here you have those school of thoughts where, some people think that all of those mandates need to come down from the government as far as how we, preserve the planet, protect the planet. But you've taken the approach where you're catering to the consumer while protecting the planet. Heck, you've got, those people that think, I still want to drive my F-150. Well, guess what? You can have that, or you can have an electric Hummer, or, because people like you have crafted that product that solves a solution while also, caters to the consumer. And that's where it all comes together, I feel like.
Completely. Yeah. And you know what? People say, other people who work in the clean industry, green industry, say, we need more government subsidies. And I always go, do you have an iPhone? And they go, yep. And I go, do you get a subsidy for buying that thing?
Exactly.
Say, we don't need that. We just need better inventions,
Exactly. Make a cost-effective product that people love.
Yeah.
You don't need a subsidy for it. No doubt about it.
And you don't have to get into a religious view about whether climate change is real or not. Yeah. Like, even like the most controversial one at the moment is what's called, and we've just started working in this space, cell ag, right? And in fact, where your base is very close to Tyson Meats, and hello, John Tyson, and like cell ag is the thing that puts the meat industry under threat, right? Because it's the ability to take a cell from a steer and photocopy it 1 million times and end up with a burger without needing a steer, right? And over the next 10 years, that's exactly what's going to happen, right? And people say to us, yeah, but like, you can't beat a steak, right? Or you can't beat a good burger, right? But suppose that burger tastes exactly the same as the other burger, but it's 10 times cheaper. And people say, I still wouldn't like it. And you're going, bullshit, you wouldn't like it. It's 10 times cheaper and it tastes the
same. And you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, right? I mean, you got to believe the engineering will get there. So, hey, but talking about energy, so you were talking about the direction for the renewables, and you're in that space and whatnot. Recently, I've been exposed to some companies that are kind of on the front end of the electronics that support geothermal and also compact sodium-based reactors. As an energy guy, what's your take on some of that? I think people would be interested into what the energy mix looks like the next 10, 15 years.
The energy mix is, energy, we believe that climate change will be largely solved by 2030, which is a shockingly controversial thing to say. And so there are 3 things that are causing climate change, really. And it's not plastic bags, right? Some people think it's all sorts of other things, but it's 3 things: energy, transport, cows. Right? And I, by the way, like a good steak, right? So, and I come from a farm, so I understand the cow. I don't like the cow, but I understand the cow. So let's take the 3 of them. So you asked about energy as the first one. So energy is done, right? Energy prices now are going to fall consistently between 2020 and 2030. And there are cutting edge energy technologies like hydrogen, like a whole lot of other things, but largely it's solved by solar, batteries, wind. Yeah. And it's done. And anyone who says I don't believe that hasn't looked at the numbers. If you look at the numbers of how much solar is costing as it's dropping in price, and then people go, yeah, but it gets dark. Yeah, big deal, right? Batteries, right? Battery prices dropping all the time. Thank you, Elon, right? And then you have wind, which is offshore wind is ridiculously strong and onshore wind is ridiculously cheap. And it's pure physics and engineering, right? So sticking gas into a turbine to generate energy is at best it's a 10% efficient solution. Now, there's somebody listening to this who's an engineer, and they're saying you can get a combined cycle gas turbine that's allegedly 40% efficient. But that's at the point that the gas went into the turbine, right? It's not at the point that the gas came out of the ground, right? And we waste a lot of energy between the ground and generating electricity. So punchline, solar, wind, batteries, all over, forget it, right? So then you have transport, and transport is sorted by electrics. So autonomous electric, so electric cars. And again, these things, I just did a road trip here and it was 25 times cheaper in electric than it was in my Range Rover, unsubsidized, right? So, and we got a service bill the other day from Tesla on that car. It was 18 months old. We got the first service, the bill was zero. Okay, so you go from 2,000 moving parts to 98 moving parts. It's all over. Yeah. And again, if you don't believe it's all over, it's because you just haven't looked at the economics. And there are bits around the edges, like if you want to haul heavy freight, you need hydrogen, but that's okay because energy is dropping in price and we'll generate hydrogen, right? And you have companies like Nikola there who've been panned about this, but Nikola is just one of several new startups in this space, and they're going to do hydrogen trucking, and there's going to be no big deal about that, right? And then the final one and most controversial one is food, right? So 70% of the arable land in the world is used to grow meat for us, right? And it doesn't really matter whether you believe in climate change or not, right? There's some very simple maths. We at the moment have about 60 billion animals in the world, and we grow some and kill some, but on average there are 60 billion. And the population is growing to 10 billion, between 9 and 10 billion by 2050. And at that point, we need 100 billion animals. And if you do the maths, we don't have enough land in the world for that, right? To grow soya and to grow all the things we need. So it doesn't matter whether you believe in climate change or not. Like we've run out of road, like, you know. And so now that we've run out of road, how are we going to fix that problem? And we could say we're all just going to go vegan and grow our own stuff in the backyard, but actually I'm not gonna, right? And like it's not that I like meat that much, really. It's just I'm such in the habit of eating it now that I don't kind of want to stop. And so inter-cell agriculture, which is we're just going to photocopy this shit, right? And that's happening. US is leading that again, and that's going to dominate the whole space. And it doesn't matter whether you think it's right or think it's wrong or anything like that, or you don't like it or you do like it. If it's using 99% less land and it's costing 10 times cheaper, then it's all over, right? And we'll be there by the middle of this decade. And that's just life.
Well, and at some point, too, you start to look at the feed efficiencies. I think I read something where it's 7 pounds of feed to get 1 pound of animal protein. That may have been in a cow model, and just the feed efficiencies don't make sense.
A cow is a 2% converter of food to food, right? That's how inefficient a cow is.
Yeah.
Now a car, if you sit in your car and you sit in, let's take the F-150 again. It wastes 98% of its energy conveying you around, right? Or me. And so you can't have that, right? Like you can't operate a world that's that inefficient, right? And same with meat, same with anything. And efficiency wins in the end, right? So it wins in everything in the end. And it doesn't care about feelings. And it doesn't care about the fact that you've been doing it for 100 years. It's over. And so we're very lucky to work in in those three spaces, which are extremely exciting. Yeah.
So when do we get the autonomous personal helicopter so that we don't have to be on the roads at all? I'm ready for that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of companies like Uber have tested that, and a couple of more companies have tested that. I don't think the helicopter is going to be it. I'm with Elon on the tunnels, and the reason why is, like, let's say you go home. I don't know. The weather is it still quite warm there?
It's pretty nice right now, but it could easily be, cold with the drop of a hat here.
Yeah. So let's say this evening you go home and you want to do a barbecue, and you're cooking away, and then there's 16 autonomous helicopters flying past at 1,000 feet. You're like, get out of town. and that's why that's not going to work. Nobody's going to tolerate that crap, right? And whereas tunnels, nobody cares whether there's things flying under us or not, right?
Yeah.
And jets will go faster eventually, and all of that, and so I think a lot of what's coming is mind blowing. The AI thing is mind blowing and slightly scary, The other thing we work in, apart from climate change, is we work in existential threats, and so we spend our money trying to prevent existential threats. And the existential threats are, number one is nuclear, so some guy pushing the wrong button, and we need to work better as a world in that area. Number two is germs, so COVID, but not COVID, but COVID plus plus. Yeah. And we just need to be smarter there. And some of that comes from animals too. Like we coop all these animals up and we feed them full of antibiotics, and we've got 60 billion of them. And then we wonder why there are some pretty nasty diseases appearing. And so we got to fix that. And then number three is climate change. And then up there is AI as well, because these computers are just getting scary smart, And so what we work a lot in too is what we call wisdom, which is all the tech's getting smarter and we're getting stupider. And I'll upset some of your listeners now by saying, if you doubt that, just listen to the extreme left and listen to the extreme right. And I'm sorry, but there ain't a whole lot of facts going on there. And so like, we got to get wise. And so we work a lot on making just people think more about what's actually going on, and it's an interesting field, and because if we're getting better at blowing shit up and we're not getting smarter about how we use that, then we've got a real problem. So there you go.
You're covering. There's a few people in the world that I would say probably pretty good examples of being the Tony Stark model. Elon Musk is one. Some of the stuff you've described, you're right in that category. I don't know where you'd be in the Marvel superheroes, but you're engaging on some pretty interesting stuff. You'll have to pick out your character. But as you think about that, one of the things is a lot of these guys who have had the opportunity to think big are thinking about space exploration, about interplanetary travel. Where are you on that?
I don't buy that, I have to say. I agree.
You think it's an ego thing for these guys?
I love Elon and he inspires the shit out of me, I have to say.
Yep.
But yeah, that one I just don't get up in the morning and get excited about. It's just too far away from a tech point of view. Yeah. But at the same time, you have to take your hat off to them, my God, like what they've achieved in a short space of time is so impressive. But no, I just think it's like that. What is that song? If you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. So if you can't get to the moon, if we can't move 10 billion people to the moon or to Mars, let's just mind the planet we fucking have.
Yeah, exactly. Well, into that. So you covered a gamut of things. The other thing I think about is 71% of the Earth's surface is covered with water. Yeah. And there's some potential for lots of things as it relates to food and a variety of things that we are not considering. Where are you in your thinking as it relates to the oceans and aquaculture and all of that?
There's some significant stuff around aquaculture coming, and that will help solve the problem. I think, though, in terms of overpopulation, the other thing about data is overpopulation is not really a concern because our population is actually declining. And people go, hang on a minute, it'll go from 7 billion or whatever we are now to 10 billion. So you can't say it's declining, but actually it is. That's just momentum that's carrying it from 7 to 10 billion. And there's a fantastic TED talk by this, I think he's Finnish or Swedish dude who studies all this population growth thing. And basically, in America, population's not increasing in real terms, and then in Europe it's not, and in China it's slowed down. And really all that's happening at the moment of population growth is it's just momentum carrying it to that number, because it's like, you know, if you have 2 kids and somebody else has 2 kids, then it just momentum carries it to a certain point and it just starts declining again. And it's something like by 2078, and this number is coming closer and closer actually, our population will start declining, and it'll start declining quite rapidly. So that problem is sorted as well. It's just further out, you know. So a lot of what we do day to day, a lot of the global problems are sorted with either money or momentum at this point. What we're trying to do, so you'd say, well, why don't we just go to bed and not bother, or go to a beach and drink pina coladas? And the reason is we're trying to shorten that time horizon from when this thing gets sorted, because until it gets sorted, our speed of knocking rainforests and fucking up the planet is getting faster and faster. So the sooner we sort it, then the better. And you notice even in Elon Musk's talks lately, he doesn't talk about it getting sorted. He just talks about velocity, about how fast we can sort it, you know. And I think to finish on the space one, I think the reason Elon is doing it that he wouldn't admit is that the existential threats. He's there going, I'd say he has looked at the existential threats and gone, statistically, we could blow up this place by accident. And therefore we better get to be spacefaring and multiplanetary, because we might just fuck up the thing by accident.
Yeah. I mean, you could see that. And the fact that I think in our nature, we're explorers and discovery. And I actually, as a kid who watched most of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions in the 60s, that inspired a whole generation of scientists and engineers. And that prospect, when that kind of died, the shuttle program was like taking a school bus to enter orbit. It wasn't all that exciting. But when the big rocket interplanetary stuff died, I think that we lost a lot of momentum, not just as the US, but worldwide around what could have been possible. Think about where we were on July 20th of 1969 and how little really changed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You lost a whole generation of engineers that weren't able to participate in what comes next.
Yeah, no, and look, we've got to go back to inventing shit and doing shit and stop whinging, right? And every country has to do that, right? And stop blaming somebody else and just get on with it, right? And there's so few examples of that right now. Yeah. And everyone's just kind of poor me, and you know, have you seen this on social media? You know, and there are very few examples now. In the US, I love the US and I love going there. And the US has been such a beacon of hope to the rest of the world for so long. And you know, you can talk about the rise of China and all that, but you offer a Chinese citizen right now US citizenship, they'll take it all day long, even with all their problems, right? And I don't have anything wrong with China either, right? But like where it needs to go from here is we need more Elons, and we need them faster, and we need to, you know, there's the one that really pissed me off about 2 years ago, right? The Joe Rogan, you know, that inferior podcast to you guys. So
we'd like to have 25% of his following, though.
Yeah.
Maybe you can help us with that.
Although lately he's kind of gone off the deep end.
Yeah, sure.
For some reason. But I like his podcast. But Elon went on to his podcast and he smoked weed in a state where it was perfectly legal to smoke weed at the time. And this is a guy who, I don't care whether you agree with this or not, it's an object fact, right? It's a provable fact that Elon Musk will have done more for climate change than almost anybody else. Now, in the future, maybe that changes, but right now that's true, okay? And there are other people who've done a lot too. I'm not saying they haven't, right? But he's done more. So how do we treat this person? Well, when he goes on a podcast to be honest, he said some profound shit that I thought was really important, right?
Yeah.
So when the guy who's saving the world goes on a podcast, how we treat him, how do we treat him? We treat him by every single major publication in the world was saying he smoked weed on Joe Rogan's podcast. Honestly, what is going on in our heads?
It's something.
It's something, yeah. Which is why we need wisdom. And so it's why we're getting into the wisdom business.
Matthew, Caleb, what do you got?
Well, I guess this could kind of lead into, well, Matthew, do you have any questions before? Go ahead. You go first.
Just one. What's your favorite beer?
It varies. Guinness. Yeah.
Good choice.
But I'll drink anything, to be honest. And I like a good bourbon actually too. But Guinness, yeah. Being Irish. By the way, I used to like Guinness at all, but then when you travel the world and you're Irish, you want to go into a bar in Macau or Shanghai or Arkansas and just go, get me a Guinness. And then you're instantly Irish at that point.
Beautiful.
And
Caleb.
I was going to ask,
we
we typically end the podcast by, asking our guests to give us, or you go back in time and talk to their younger self and what sort of advice they would give themselves. I kind of wanted to mix it in with a question that I had, after missing out on that, $1 billion deal back in 2008. I have to imagine that kind of shaped some of the you did afterwards or had some sort of impact on your life and your decisions. How would you, I guess, if I were to mix both of those questions together, before efficiency, of course.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I went to some pretty dark places after that, actually. Suffered a lot from anxiety, learned to meditate, and that's not to do with religion. And learned to be a seriously centered motherfucker, actually, which has a lot to do with meditation, has a lot to do with exercise, diet, all that kind of stuff. And to give you an idea, I am half the weight I was in 2008. Yep.
Wow.
So, I was a big fucking boy, I can tell you. Yep. And so the advice get, when we start off in business at whatever age that is, and running our own business in particular, but it's also true of people who work in corporations, you tend to be overly influenced by what everyone else is thinking, right? And really the advice is listen to yourself much earlier, right, in life, and trust yourself much earlier in life. But if you're going to listen to yourself and trust yourself much earlier in life, then you better start making a lot of sense earlier, right? And how the hell do you do that, right? How do you become smarter earlier? And that's where things like meditation comes in, and or praying if you're religious, right? Is like there is wisdom out there, and listening, figuring out how to listen to yourself a little bit more and what's truly going on in your brain, especially nowadays with social media. I don't know if you've seen that Netflix show, Social Dilemma, kind of frightened the shit out of me. And I liked a bit of social, right? But think about like even 20 years ago. I use the example, my daughter is 20, and when I used to collect her from hockey practice, she had no mobile phone, right? And so I would collect her, and she would before I collected her, she would just watch the cars passing by, and she would talk to her mates. And then all of a sudden, 5 or 6 years later, she would be on her phone looking at social. And that's not a message about young people and social media, because I would be on my phone on social, right? And we have to figure out ways of listening to ourselves and listening to the peace and quiet, and then becoming wiser because of that, right? And if the way you do that is by praying, then pray. If the way you do that is by meditating, if it's by doing yoga, if it's by, journaling, writing in a book, but figure out a way of getting the fuck away from the crack cocaine that is all this social shit, right? And the news and everything else. And if we don't, we're fucked. It's that simple, right? So, and then linking that back to your question is find a way of becoming wiser earlier, right? And then trust yourself once you are becoming wise. None of us are perfectly wise, but find a way of listening to and trusting yourself. And I had one, and then I'll shut up. I had one recently where we thought up this crazy car idea, right? I didn't even trust myself. I thought it was a good idea, but I didn't trust myself fully. I trusted myself kind of enough to get it going, but I didn't trust myself fully. And then we had to raise some money into it over the last couple of weeks, right? Quite a lot of money. We raised the money in the second phone call, right? So we picked up the phone and the second investor said, I'll take the entire investment you're looking for. And I was there going, Crowley, you fucking idiot. Like, what were you doubting all the time with this thing, right? Like pissing about and losing sleep and all of that stuff, right? Like, just trust yourself earlier. But if you're going to trust yourself earlier, you better be talking some sense, right?
That's fantastic. And now that we've talked a little bit about social, the way we ultimately land the plane here is, where can people find out more about everything that you're doing? Because I'm sure, based on the listeners of this podcast, they're going to want to follow what you're doing. So what's the best way for them to find out what all you're up to?
Yeah, the good news about having a name like Norman Crowley, Crowley, is I'm the only Norman Crowley. So if you just type me into Google, you'll find the LinkedIns and the Twitters and all the good stuff. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks so much for coming on. This was
thank you.
This was great. Really enjoyed it. And maybe in a future time we'll have to share a pint of Guinness or your favorite bourbon. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, me too. Definitely.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care.
It easy,
Thanks
guys.
so much.
See you, Norman.
Bye. Take care,
Bye.
Norman.